Welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings. My guest for this program is Andrew Johnson, a gentleman that I've known for, I think, a little bit more than a decade, and who has been a very, very active researcher in 9/11. And particularly, I think it's fair to say Andrew has been very closely associated with the work of Dr. Judy Wood, who is... in my view, I think in many people, the most interesting, probably the most correct of the 9/11 scientists who's been researching this, but also by far the most controversial. And we could probably get into all of that. But Andrew is from the UK, and I'm just checking out your formal bio, Andrew. But you know what? I think maybe I should just skip your formal bio and welcome you to the show, and we'll take it from there. So greetings, and glad to have you here, by the way.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. It's great to have this opportunity to speak with you about these issues, and we, as you say, we've known each other for a long time, and I think we had a period of confusion and so forth.
We could go further than that, Andrew. We were really we weren't friendly for a little while. I think it's
that's probably fair enough to say. Yeah, and I think we have a mutual friend to thank for giving us an opportunity to straighten some of that out. I think it's really good that you're very brave to have me on. I think is what I would like to say, and I thank you for the opportunity to. Tell you some of the things that I know, basically, and that we've talked about a little bit in private, and but it's public evidence that I'm talking about here. So, and just mentioning a little bit about my background.
Yes.
My background is in software engineering, which I did for 20 years. I'm one of these sort of home computer geek generation and all of that stuff, and I got into software development. And did that for a few years, and I also branched out into education. So I was giving sort of evening classes in doing C programming. For example, I did that for 3 or 4 years, and then that has ended up with me working for the Open University, which is we do distance learning courses in the UK, and it's got about 50,000 students, I think, in the UK and around the world. And I will say right now, I still work for the Open University, but they don't they don't endorse what I do in these fields of research. I don't get any involvement with the university on that basis, and it's completely separate. I think most of them don't even know I'm involved with this, and I think if they did, they would make them uncomfortable.
Oh, really? It's that.
Well, I think so. Yeah. But because it's all distance learning, you see, and I don't really meet the students very often, and if I do, it's only for very short periods of time. It'd take too long to explain that, because that's just how the Open University works. It's a distance learning organisation. You can look it up and look on their website and everything, and if anybody wants to find out more. And but that actually has a little link, because I actually still work for a university. That actually feeds into the story ultimately of how I became associated with Dr. Judy Wood. We can go into that later, but so that's just a bit about me and my technical background. I've been interested in 9/11 since, obviously the day it happened, but I got heavily involved in research from about 2004, and that's when it all started.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about your relationship to Judy Wood, Dr. Judy Wood? And we're going to be exploring, of course, her scientific work on 9/11 in just a moment. But how did you become associated with her, and what's exactly your relationship to her professionally in all of this?
Well, we don't have a professional relationship, because she basically, her career at Clemson University ended in 2006, and that was partly as a result, not exclusively, I say this, as a result of her doing 9/11 research. The university was quite uncomfortable with some of the things that she was doing, and of course, you and I both know that that's been the case for other people that have worked for universities in other fields, in ufology and other fields. So she essentially was in that similar situation, and she finished there. I think it was round about it was sometime in 2006. I don't recall the exact date. And since then, she's basically been living off savings and that sort of thing. Won't go into any more details other than that. But she's been an independent person in research field, we both got involved with this group called Scholars for 9/11 Truth, and that happened at the end of 2005. Now, because I have a background in technical subjects, as I say, software development, I did a degree in computer science and also a module of physics, so I have a fairly strong understanding of, some degree level physics.
I see.
I know what Planck's constant is. I know what a photon is, and those sorts of things. I know a bit about mechanics, which is Dr. Wood's area of speciality, as well as interferometry. So I know a bit about a lot of those things. I can do bits of the maths, not to the level that Dr. Wood can, but I can do some of it. Things like that. So I'm familiar with that. And the little maths thing, for example, how I got involved with Dr. Wood was a result of some maths, effectively, because if you look at the destruction of the towers, right, you can see, people say they went into free fall, and that's what I used to think. I used to think they went into free fall, but actually they didn't, and we'll get to that later.
Yes.
But if you measure the time, you take a point on the top of the building and measure the time that apparent point took to get to the ground, you can see that it was very close to what you call free fall speed. And you can work this out. You can work this out with an equation of motion. You have an equation of motion which is expressed S equals ut plus a half at squared, where this is the initial velocity and the acceleration and then time. That you do that in physics at high school.
May I interject something?
Sure.
This is something that she discussed at great length in her book, Where Did the Towers Go? And essentially, she made it very clear, I guess we could say, is that the towers fell not only, it's not even calling them free fall speed. I think she used the example of a billiard ball falling in a vacuum. So if you dropped a billiard ball from the height of the top of the north or south tower, I think it would have hit the ground in a vacuum, something like 9.2 or 9.3 seconds or something.
Correct.
And whereas the towers themselves fell like 1 second longer, so you have all of this mass. I think like 500,000 tons each, something like that, falling with essentially no resistance. There's no resistance to the speed of the collapse or dustification, or however you want to put it. It came down it seems preposterous. And this was the thing, even long before I knew about Judy Wood's work. This was one of the key things that just struck me, as I couldn't understand how that was possible. But anyway,
right.
So go on.
Sure, that's right, and that's what that really didn't strike me until 2004. Even though I saw the events on TV, it was 2004 when that very same thing that you just described struck me, and then I saw it in a film called 9/11: The Great Illusion by George Humphrey, a Texan, and he put that equation of motion in the film, or a version.
Okay.
It wasn't quite the same, and that's what I started posting this on forums, and I went onto a physics forum. I forget the exact address, but this is all in my book, 9/11: Finding the Truth. You can download for free from my website, and also 9/11: Holding the Truth is free from my website.
Yes. And your website is checktheevidence.com.
Correct. And if anybody is listening, wants to contact me and can't find anything, you can use the search function on there. But do come onto the contact page, send me a message, and I'll try and direct you to whatever it is you want to know about. Going back to the free fall, putting that on forums, saying what's wrong with this free fall equation when applied to the Twin Towers, and basically didn't really get a straight answer. And as you said, Dr. Wood has essentially done the same thing with this billiard ball example, and it was a kind of a more illustrative, it was a graphical illustration based on the equations of motion. It was more thorough than what I'd done, much more thorough and much more illustrative. So, and then following that, and I can't prove this bit, but I strongly suspect that there was somebody watching these forums. Somebody was watching these forums and seeing who was making sensible arguments about 9/11, because what happened at the end of 2005 is I was contacted by Stephen E. Jones, who's this physicist at Brigham Young University, and we'll probably mention his name a bit later in this presentation, this conversation. But he invited me to join this website, this group, which was called Scholars for 9/11 Truth, which he was apparently forming with this other fellow that some of your listeners may have heard of, and I know that, Richard, you know him, Jim Fetzer. And they set up this group in the end of 2005, and this was following the release of the NIST technical reports, the 10,000 pages of documents, which were released in, I think, August 2005. And I think the fact that Stephen E. Jones came onto the scene around then, and again we'll talk more about this later, was to do with the release of the technical reports. So I then joined the Scholars for 9/11 Truth group. It's a website. We had a forum, as these forums go. We were posting stuff on there, discussing areas of research, Pentagon, Twin Towers, plane crashes, Shanksville, all that was discussed in various ways on the forum. And then it was in 2006, I think, that I first heard Dr. Wood's name. And I know that she'd got together with Dr. Morgan Reynolds, who was an economist from Texas A&M University, Dr. Morgan Reynolds.
Okay. And
they produced this paper, which was somewhat critical of other aspects of research and activities that have been going on in the scholars group, particularly of Stephen E. Jones and this thermite theory, which I know you and I have spoken about. We'll probably get back to that later.
Well, I had a little bit of a love affair with the thermite theory for a while, and that was what caused our own falling out.
Yes, essentially that's how it was exactly, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And I know why that was put out, and I'm certain that I am correct about this. And again, we'll go into more details about that later. So that essentially, we both joined this group. Dr. Wood and Dr. Reynolds had written this paper. I read that paper, which was essentially a criticism of this thermite idea, and it went into a lot of detail. And that's still on the website. That paper is still available on Dr. Wood's website. It was written in 2006. And it's available on Dr. Morgan Reynolds' website, which is nomoregames.net. You can see that paper there if anybody wants to go back and read it. Certain things have become apparent since then, so that paper's in parts that's a little bit out of date, but the essence of it is all still correct and accurate. And I read that, and they mentioned my name. So my name was mentioned in this paper, and a little part of them, I'm famous, but it wasn't really. But actually, what I found out was I had been used to put out disinformation. That's what I realised, because Jones had wanted this video editing together of what he considered to be evidence of thermite, reacting as part of the destruction of the towers, and really that was at best unproven. You couldn't really say that it was, and I didn't realise this because he's a professor of physics at Brigham Young. I'm the Open University computing and IT tutor with a knowledge of physics. So I assumed that he had more knowledge than me. He was being honest, and that's why I went with his theory originally. And it was really Dr. Wood and Dr. Reynolds who'd written this paper pointing out these fallacies that he'd come up with, which woke me up to the idea and the evidence that something else was going on. Something else happened at the World Trade Center, and I began to realize how important that actually was. This was on a different level. And so really, I think it was probably early 2007, mid-2007, when I'd come to understand that Dr. Wood and Dr. Reynolds were being attacked for a reason. Because a lot of the other researchers were saying, they're just coming out with all these ridiculous conspiracy theories and all these silly ideas about. As if
9/11 was a conspiracy.
Right, and they were saying, of course, this is bringing the good research about thermite into disrepute, and Stephen E. Jones actually accused Dr. Wood of attacking him, and we've got audio recordings of him saying that she never attacked him. Certainly they were critical of what he put out, but it was never a personal attack. And there's quite a lot of detail here, which I don't think it's just worth going into here. But
may I I would just say, I think what separates Judy Wood from everyone else is the fact that she asks one question. It actually is the question of her book, but it's essentially relating to the lack of mass.
Yes.
You've got these massive structures. Two of them over 100 stories tall, another one nearly 50 stories tall, and others that are I think 9 or 10 stories tall. And, I mean, significant. And when you look at the overhead images, and she shows them and has shown them many times, and you have shown them in your lectures many times, there's essentially nothing there. It's like there's some debris there, obviously, but compared with what had existed, it's a serious question to ask. Where did all of this mass go? And I don't know of anyone else who's asked this.
Not really, and that's I think why she took such a lot of flack, because a lot of other people were talking about put options and the hijacker's passport found on the pavement, and and George Bush having foreknowledge because he said he saw the first plane crash when he couldn't have seen that because he was in the school, and the statements by some officials.
There are a lot of interesting questions that people have been asking about 9/11. They're not invalid, but what she's asking is quite unique. I don't know anyone else has really dove into this.
That's right, and she, of course, was surprised, and she was surprised that even she relates the story of being in the college faculty room, and she was the only one that was, looking at the buildings saying, what is happening to those buildings? The other members of her, her academic peers didn't seem to be reacting the same way she was. That she had great difficulty with this for quite a few years. I will point out one thing which I forgot to say earlier, that the billiard ball example, that was a paper that she wrote, and it was presented at an engineering conference in 2005, I think June 2005.
Okay.
So that's a scientific paper that was presented at an engineering conference, and I think it's the only one recognised academic engineering conference. That other paper that you mentioned, the Copenhagen paper, that's never been presented by a university. That appeared, to my understanding, in the Bentham journal, which is a vanity journal. It's not a real academic journal. These vanity journals.
I have to confess I didn't know that. Yeah, I remember when that paper came out. That was in 2004, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was after that. No, it wasn't 2004. That was
really?
Probably came
maybe
out in
2005
or 2007. No, it was later, because Niels Harrit didn't really come onto the scene. He was one of the co-authors of that paper, or whatever you want to call it.
I'll be guided by you.
I can't remember the exact date. I have to go and check it out. But it was after, because Jones didn't come out with the thermite nonsense until 2005, and it was around about September 2005. Okay. So it was definitely after that, and I suspect it was probably later. It was probably at least 2006, maybe 2007.
Thanks for the correction. We're talking about the thermite paper, and by the way, I just want to say that. So the reason that I wasn't the only person who thought that the nanothermite explanation was interesting, and just to describe for listeners, not everyone is aware of the intricacies of what we're talking about here. So Stephen E. Jones and a number of other scientists were involved in a study where they collected debris around the World Trade Center in the aftermath of that, and there are all of these affidavits from people who said, yes, I collected the dust on this day and at this time and so forth. And that's the provenance issue. But if you just go past that for a moment, the dust samples were then analyzed, and they were all, I believe all of them found to contain unusually high amounts of the chemical or substance known as thermite, but not ordinary thermite. This was nano-engineered thermite.
This is what they claim, but we'll get into that in a bit. So, why they put that in there? Because I think there's reasons. All those the terminology that you use, there's reasons for them using that, which we'll get.
I just want to finish this explanation here because so they indicated that this is nano-engineered thermite. It was only the U.S. military had it by the late 90s, I think, is what they said, and that. And this was found in an unusually high concentration in all of the samples. How do we explain that? What are the properties of nano-engineered thermite and so on? And so it seemed like this was a smoking gun.
It seemed like
that was where I was at for quite some time.
That's right. Yeah. That's the way it was presented. But as you said earlier on, the key thing with the looking at the World Trade Center is, as you said earlier on, and we'll say it again, that the buildings pretty much about 85% disappeared, right? So if you look at the actual, as you said, the material on the ground, there is some, but in proportion to the size of the building, about 85% of it disappeared. It literally turned to dust. Now you can see that visually if you watch the videos, but as you also alluded to earlier on, it's supported by the seismic evidence. And if you look carefully at the seismic traces, as Dr. Wood does in her book, the even more remarkable thing is that the seismic trace indicates that the ground was experiencing a removal of weight, not an addition of, not things falling onto it. It's actually reacting to the weight of the buildings being removed. That's what the seismic trace shows.
Am I remembering this correctly? So she did an example in this book about, she did a comparison of the demolition of the Seattle Kingdom. Right. That's a major stadium, of course. And that was taken down, I think, about a year before 9/11, so around 2000. And that had a particular seismic signature, which happened to be greater than the seismic signature of the entire South Tower when it came down, even though I think the South Tower was something like 30 times the mass of the Kingdom. So that, that's one of these things that makes you go, that's quite interesting. And is that what you mean by the removal of mass?
Well, kind of. I mean, as you say, the Kingdom definitely fell to the ground. It was controlled demolition. We know that. It was filmed. They had about 6 cameras filming it. I think it's on YouTube. You can see it from all different angles. So we know that happened. The data is, unequivocal. And then, as you say, you compare that to the towers, and the seismic signature ends up being about the same. But beyond that, the actual single figure, I think the Kingdom was 2.2 or 2.1, and the towers was, one of the towers was 2.3. I can't recall the exact figures, but again, if you go and look at the actual trace,
it was higher than the tower.
It may have been slightly higher, yes. Yeah, so it might have been the Kingdom was 2.3 and the towers were 2.1. That's in the Dr. Wood's book. It's on the website, drjudywood.com, and I advise listeners to go to the website because I recently rebuilt the website using this WordPress content management system, and so you can go on to drjudywood.com and you can see a summary of that evidence, all there, very easily accessible. So while you're listening to us, you might want to go and look at the pictures, and I've put some slideshows on so you can see all of this in sort of like 10-15 minutes if you want, and then you can go into as much detail as you like from there. But going back to the Kingdom, yes, so it appears that though the building was much less mass, the seismic signature was about the same in terms of the actual figure. One was 2.1, the other was 2.3. But if you look at how that signal changed over time, the ground, I think if I've got this correct, again the figures are in the Where Did the Towers Go book and on the website, the ground only shook with the World Trade Center for 8 seconds. It only shook for 8 seconds. With the Kingdom, I think it shook for 52 seconds. For it, whilst all this material was coming down and falling over itself. Yeah. So that also shows you that something very, very unusual was happening to the towers.
There's such a massive difference in the size of the two.
Correct.
I have this here. I don't know if I can find this really quickly. I did find it. So I'm going to put this up to the screen, and I realize this is. So you see the Kingdom on the bottom end there, and there's one of the 2 towers on the right. And that's at Building 7. Yeah, that's World Trade Center. So, Kingdom was big. And look how large the towers were.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about.
And you'll see illustrations of that in Dr. Wood's presentations and actually just comparing what the towers were to what was left. You have this tiny little portion of the Marriott Hotel left over and the rest gone. And you've got other evidence too, not just the seismic seed. People say, she's only relying on 1 or 2 bits of evidence. No, it's not true. That's a lie. For example, she references the story of Stairwell B, where you had 14 people trapped in Stairwell B. There was Mickey Cross, there was Jay Jonas, I think his name. There were 2 firefighters, 3 or 4 other guys, and they're coming down the stairwell. And the building's literally coming apart. I'm not going to say collapsing because it wasn't collapsing. The building was coming apart. Mickey Cross, in his account, he relates he's walking down the stairs and he had to grab onto his helmet because his helmet's lifting off his head. His helmet's lifting off his head. How does that happen? Now we'll get to that later. Yeah. But they're sort of crouching down, expecting to die, and they look up and they see blue sky. They're on about the 8th or 10th floor or something. I don't know. And they're looking up and they're seeing blue sky. That's about over 100 stories of building have disappeared above them. Where did they go? and there are several accounts like that confirm the seismic evidence. They confirm the videos, and it was filmed from multiple angles, And then I think you mentioned when you did the broadcast a couple of weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, that we had the spire, as it's called. That's the name we've given to it. It was this column which was 700 feet tall.
Oh, yes.
It disappeared.
It disappears. It's right on YouTube. Anyone can see this.
Yeah.
You see this massive vertical beam.
Yep.
It's right there in front of you, and the next thing you see, it's just not there. How does such a thing disintegrate? Yes. Right before your eyes on the YouTube video. That's not a fake video. That's real. How does this happen?
Yes, that's right.
I cannot understand this in any conventional.
Now, let's temporarily go back to this idea of thermite. So the thing that I was pointing out to people when I saw that Spire video probably not for the first time, but after I'd kind of inwardly digested it, was if this was a thermite reaction, where was all the lights? Where was all the yellow light or the white light from the explosions while this thing was disintegrating? There wasn't any. So that right there, just that Spire evidence, rules out nukes, it rules out thermites, it rules out incendiaries causing that damage. And there are other. I mean, if the thermite explanation was correct, as Jones argued, and you'll see these pictures of the angle core columns. This comes up. I've made various postings about this, so you'll see these pictures, and these are reproduced in Where Do the Towers Go, where people will argue, they use thermite cutter charges, and you see these, workers, with the remains of the building, and they've got these steel beams cut at an angle of 45 degrees.
Yeah.
Now they claim that that's from using thermite cutter charges. No, it isn't. It's from oxyacetylene torches, and there are pictures of the oxyacetylene hoses going across the debris pile. All right, now they're in Dr. Wood's book. Now, if that sort of kills two birds with one stone, if you will, because if these angle cut core columns, were cut by acetylene torches, that means they weren't cut by thermite. And also, you've got these rubber hoses going over this supposedly hot debris pile, which actually wasn't hot, right? So that rules out the debris pile being hot. Not just that, there are other factors too, which are in the book. The other thing with the thermite, which doesn't stack up, is that the army, and this is well documented, they use thermite grenades for burning paper. So if they want to dispose of documents in a safe, they'll just drop a thermite grenade onto the safe, and that burns all the paper. What did we see on the streets after 9/11?
Lots and lots of paper.
Lots of paper.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's another factor which essentially rules it out. And there are
I think this does really put the thermite theory to bed, and I feel silly that for at least a while I supported it. But look, all I can say is the one thing I didn't want to do is get involved in scientific arguments one way or the other. My feeling then, and even now, in a sense, is it's most important to get 9/11 out in into a public debate. There are so many problems with the theory, the official nonsensical theory. But I agree with you that there's so much more that has to be discussed.
Right. Good. Well,
may I ask you, where does the thermite theory stand among the rest of the 9/11 truth community, I guess I could say? Is that still a widespread theory or not?
Yeah, I think it is. Basically, I mean, anyone can test that for themselves by looking at the various forums and postings, and you'll still see it. I mean, one of the things we can maybe get into a bit more in the second hour is how this has been promoted through seemingly sponsored bodies like this Architects and Engineers group. I know quite a bit about the Architects and Engineers group, which I think we did speak about a little bit, but that is one of the main groups that has continued to promote the use of thermite as an explanation. And I have proof, really, that the person that is doing this should know better. He should know better because he has, I can go into this later, but, I have all this proof on my website and evidence that this is the case. So what I was going to go on to say, just when you said that about, sort of putting the thermite theory to bed, is taking a step back and asking, well, why did they choose that theory in the first place? we can now be sure, I can now be sure, and if other people want to study the evidence available, they can be sure too for themselves, not based on what I tell them, but by looking at the evidence. Why did they choose this theory? Why did they suggest that thermite was used? What was the reason? The reason is to do with what the towers were made of, basically, in summary. We'll come to that in a minute. But the other reason is that they were trying to cover up something else. They had a reason for putting out another cover story. Obviously, the first cover story is Osama bin Laden and hijacked planes and all of that.
Right, exactly.
That's the first cover story.
That's still the main one out there.
Yep, that's right. Despite the efforts of yourself and myself and many others.
That's the first and main line of defense.
Yeah, like the same with UFO issue. There aren't any UFOs. The government's never investigated them. Blah blah blah. The Air Force hasn't since 1968 or whenever Blue Book finished. You'll know all these dates more than I will, but you know what I'm saying. And it's the same deal with 9/11. Oh yes, we did investigate it. We had the commission report. We have the NIST reports.
Yep.
They said it was fire. They said it was failures in national security. Forget about it. We're 17 years on. Just let's move on. We've got to do all these things in our society and remove all these freedoms, and then everything will be fine. And all of that. But there's a bigger, an even bigger picture here, which is what I tried to explain in my presentations, which you graciously sat through in Greece when we were there.
Yeah, people should know. You and I lectured together in Athens, Greece, a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago. Actually, less than a year and a half ago.
Well, actually, Richard, if you remember, it was 2 years ago. Because you remember what happened last year, where we won't get into that now, but I actually didn't lecture, did I? I didn't give a presentation. Do you remember?
Oh my God! Right.
It was actually 2016. Yeah, it was 2016 when you and I both gave presentations, and then
you were on someone's bad list.
I wasn't I? I mean, maybe we won't talk about that here.
Bad list. Oh man.
Yeah. We won't talk about that here because the guy's not here to sort of make his case, is he? But that
was totally wrong. It's totally wrong.
Yeah. Well, I thought so. But,
yes.
Anyway, we won't get into that.
Thank you for correcting me. So 2016. So we got together at that time and really hashed out. I mean, I have to say, we hashed out a lot of the things that had caused some tension and dissension between you and me, and I think we were both glad about it. I mean, I just felt, look, this is a great guy, and I'm very, very glad that we had the opportunity to talk in a face-to-face way, the way that we did.
Yeah, me too. It's great because I sensed, and when we talk, we realise we do have a fair bit in common about some of the things we've done in our background, don't we, and stuff. So
that's right.
And you're like a couple of years older than me, and we've got kids and stuff. So
much.
we've got that in common. You're aging better than I am, I think, Richard. So I'll say that.
I feel it every day, man. Every day, I feel it. I do.
Yeah, I think I do.
I feel good, but I feel it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We shouldn't talk about that, should we? We've been too self-indulgent.
I want to say one other thing, though. You mentioned kids, and I will just note that for years and years, in my little domain of the UFO research field, I noticed for ages that there was almost no other researchers who were actively raising children. It's such a rare thing. My kids, like yours, they're grown up now. They're 22 and 20, and but when I was a decade ago, they were very young and required a lot of time and effort, and it's tough. It's tough to get a lot of the research done when you've got two young people who really need so much of your time. You know this, of course.
Oh yeah.
It's a great amount of work, and I don't think there are many researchers in any of these fields, whatever it is, that are actively raising children.
I think, absolutely, and I think it depends on your lifestyle a bit, because I was working at home quite a lot, and I still do. As I say, this OU thing that I work for, it's distance learning, so it's all pretty much home based, for me.
Yeah.
Which gives, makes a big difference. It means I don't have a 2-hour commute every day, and that's, if you've got 2 hours taken out of your day, that's 2 hours of your day that you've got left to do research, isn't it? So that's kind of the way I look at it from my own personal situation. But going back to the evidence of
yes,
9/11, and I think we've covered some of the main obvious ones.
I have a handwritten list of things that I want to get into, but I'll keep going, and then I just want to hit some of the things. And these are items that Dr. Judy Wood talks about in her book, and I know that you have discussed many times. But if you want to finish up what you're about to say here, go right ahead, please.
Yeah, well, there's other things that come up, and what I'll do is I'll paste you a link so you can just see this as well. You'll know what it is, but I think this is. I made this little animated GIF, which is, you've seen these on Facebook and stuff, but this is of one of the toasted cars.
Oh yes, I was hoping we would get into this, the toasted cars.
So that's just I'm going to have to send it on that window. Yeah, that's okay. So if you click on that link, and people can just look for this on the Dr. Judy Wood website, because this comes up as one of the images in the slideshow. This isn't that, Richard, but it's the same image, but not in a slideshow. Trying to explain it. But, for example, the toasted cars is one of the things that Dr. Wood has talked about from the early days that she discovered pictures of, because she collected 10,000 pictures. That's how this all started, and she was doing that for a period of at least 3 years. And two of these pictures are shown here, or I've actually cropped out the relevant portions of two pictures and then overlaid them. And this is the so-called toasted parking lot that where you can see, and apologise if the viewers can't see this and the listeners can't see this, but you can get it on the Dr. Judy Wood website. I
have the book here, and I don't know how to show it on this screen right now, unfortunately, but I can show it up to the camera. I think people can see this. It's amazing stuff. So here's one perfect example, like in the beginning of the chapter, and you see a car. This is typical, where a car is almost melted and disintegrated in the front half, and the rear is in relatively good shape. The interiors of the cars are all just like disintegrated on the inside here. A number of these, you got the car park, which is on the west side near where the World Trade Center was, and then you have FDR Drive, which you know this inside now, but this is on the along the lower eastern side of Manhattan, quite a bit of a distance, and you have the same phenomenon at FDR Drive. In fact, here's a picture that I think this is FDR Drive, so you can see what is going on with these images. You have an entire row of vehicles. They're all like gray, and like they've been subjected to 100 years of rust.
Exactly. So the rusting was one. I'm glad you brought it up, because the rusting was very rapid. More rapid than you would get from a burnt car. It was like almost. Yeah, they're like
crumbling. They look like they're crumbling.
Yeah. And
now, was there an argument made that someone had towed them from the?
Yeah, I want to illustrate that with another image for you.
Right.
But just before we do that. For example, you mentioned about the back end being okay and the front end being all mangled up and apparently melted.
Yeah.
So you immediately think car fire, heat, thermite, maybe even, and that's what they tried to argue actually. But on some of the cars, there's a couple of pictures where the polycarbonate assembly on the top of the car, which holds the lights, for these
perfectly
cars,
good.
They're still in good shape. So this rules out the heat. And this is another theme that you see in the evidence. You have evidence of high heat, or what looks like high heat, next to evidence of no heat, or very little heat.
Yeah.
And for example, they tried to say it was thermite, but yet the dust came down, went over people, and we have pictures of people covered in this dust in the videos and in the stills. And they weren't burnt. They had no red marks on their skin. They were just covered in this dust. And
Very
the
good
dust
point.
wasn't hot. So that again rules out heat. But if you click on your own chat window, Richard, if not the dual,
I can do it. I don't know if that will.
Well, it's just for your own interest. If you just get it quickly,
so no one else will see this.
No one will see this. So they're going to have to go to the website and see it. It is on the website, though, as I say. If you
this
go
is
to
at the site, checktheevidence.com, and if you just go to that site, checktheevidence.com, go and look in Toasted Cars. This is Toasted Cars 3 GIF.
Yeah, it's in the 9/11 folder. But other than that, you can see it on Dr. Wood's website as well. So if you go into drjudywood.com, right, and then you go onto the slideshow and the toasted cars.
So let me describe this for people who can't see this. So this is really great. You have before and after, and you have them exact, like from the exact angle before, exact angle after of the cars before they were toasted, and then after, and it's a really remarkable.
It is, and if you look specifically, Richard, let me direct your eye to if you look to upper left of the image, towards the upper left, this sort of upper left quadrant, you've got two cars which are suddenly toasted and rusted. One seems to have slightly moved closer to the other, and then just further up the picture, you've got a black MPV and a red car. They seem to be pretty okay. You can still see some of the red in that car. Those are not toasted yet. They're probably 20 feet apart, 15 feet apart.
Okay, right, yeah.
And you can look around that picture and see other examples. I think that's about the clearest, because the exposure is a little challenging because the sun has come round during the day and you can see the difference in the shadow.
Right. The shadows are different.
But that, to me, I made that image deliberately because this proves that some of the toasted cars were not towed. They remained in place. Some of them may well have been towed. We don't know what happened to all of these cars during the day. Some of them may indeed have been towed just after the towers were destroyed. We don't know. But here in this particular example, this proves that the toasted cars, some of them remained in place. So this proves that there are liars putting postings on forums saying the toasted cars were towed to try and explain them away. This picture proves them wrong. So it proves
in a sense, it almost doesn't. I mean, to me, maybe I'm missing something big here. It almost doesn't matter if those cars on FDR Drive were towed or not. I mean, the effect is what's really important here. And if they were toasted on FDR Drive, then you've got. I mean, that would be very interesting because that would, if we're getting into a directed energy beam type of scenario, which is I know where we're going to be going here, then it could be argued that from a point of perspective well above, let's just say, that's something, maybe there was an unintended effect, partly across Manhattan Island.
Maybe, but I think what you should pay attention to here in this particular picture, if people can look at it, where we've got this parking lot with some cars toasted, others not, but still pretty much remaining in place, is that we've essentially got, as the picture shows, you've got zones within this region where whatever it is that's going on is going on, and then you've got other regions where whatever it is that's going on is not going on, if I can put it like that. In other words, this is a regional effect. Something is going on in little zones, and that's very important because it actually relates to an area of the study that Dr. Wood was involved in.
Yeah, because not all of these cars are equally toasted. Is that what you're getting at here?
Correct.
There's a great variation in that effect.
Correct. And we'll get to that later, what that probably almost certainly is.
Well, hopefully. We're already 3/4 of the way through our first hour.
Well, we can do this in the second hour, but it will take a little bit of explaining. But going back to your point about, yes, we can see the effect, and yes, we can see it's unusual. It doesn't really matter whether the cars were towed or not. But what happens is, as you know, with skeptics and debunkers, if you've got an audience, if the skeptic can say, yes, this car was towed, and then show a picture, as some of these forums do, of some of the cars being towed, then that's enough. The other people won't think about the fact that the effect of the effect itself. If the debunker shows a picture of this thing being towed, he will then gain the trust that his observation is accurate. Therefore, we can ignore the effect. You see what I'm saying? So no, this picture,
the effect is very unusual. Like, how does this happen, and why did it happen? There's not a good there's not any explanation for that. I don't know of anyone who's really tried, other than Dr. Judy Wood, to explain this effect or even look at it.
And it becomes very, very challenging because what the implications are. And it's, again, going back to the UFO issue, the implications of the UFO issue and all of that is, they are also very challenging, which is why it's not openly admitted. And why
and it's one of the things that really made me come around to Dr. Judy Wood. I mean, I'm in a field where 9/11 researchers want nothing to do with me, generally speaking. I've written about UFO subject for so long, and I understand it in a way. Like, when you're on the fringe fighting for a particular truth against an intractable establishment hierarchy, you don't want to wear any extra albatrosses around your neck. I mean, the 9/11 struggle is big enough, and then to throw in a guy like myself, I know I read comments that because I wrote a couple of pieces years ago on 9/11.
Oh yes, yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah,
I think
remember.
I was the first UFO writer.
I think you were.
And the 9/11 people were not happy. They're like, "Get this guy out of our club." Mm-hmm. So, but
I mean, the only guy
Judy Wood. Well, she's just, she's coming in with, and she's not trying to disrupt the field. I don't think. I think she's just asking questions that nobody else has asked, and she's coming to some very, I guess we can say, extreme conclusions about what's going on behind it.
What we'll also get to is how this actually does, from where I'm standing and what I've read and looked at, and I'll say why, this actually does connect into the UFO cover-up in several ways. And we'll get to that in the second hour. And that's what's so kind of ironic, that the people that should be talking about this, and you've heard me say this, I'm sure, don't seem to want to talk about it, even though it actually backs up other things that they're saying in a kind of roundabout way, but it does back it up. And we'll get to the why.
I agree with you. And I just want to say one last thing on behalf of Dr. Wood. You hear these people calling her findings like junk science. And I just think, are you kidding me? First of all, she's a PhD in materials. What's her PhD in?
Materials engineering science.
Thought so, yeah. So, and I mean, you just listen to her speak for a few minutes, and you can see that this is an individual who is incredibly logical, incredibly detailed in her analysis. I mean, she just looks into the particulars of every little element of this and is applying, as far as I can see, the rules of scientific inquiry to her subject better than anyone else has actually done. And so, when you hear these claims, it's just a sneer. That's really all that it is, in my view.
Yeah, and I mean, I could tell you many stories about what's happened with that, and some of those are in the 9/11 Finding the Truth book with the evidence. And as I'm telling stories, I'm not making things up. I've got the evidence to back up what I'm saying, and it is very, very unfortunate that you've got this going on, that people can't just look at the evidence and evaluate it on that basis and kind of, in essence, it's not about Dr. Judy Wood, really. It's about the evidence.
May I ask you to comment on one other thing? And this isn't necessarily relating to her work. This is just in general. If you look at a map of New York, of Lower Manhattan, all right, and you look at a map of the World Trade Center complex, including Building 7, all right, and you look at the destruction that occurred. I mean, there's a lot of reasons Building 7 really, what is wrong with this picture? Building 7 is wrong with this picture. Why? It's across the street. It's literally like the rest of the World Trade Center complex is a very kind of coherent unit, except Building 7 is not. So it's directly across the street, across Vesey Street. It's between two other major structures which suffered no damage. Building 7 is neatly ensconced across the street, directly across the rest of the World Trade Center, and is completely destroyed. And by the way, without any real significant destruction to these other buildings. I mean, minor. So that alone, that's very interesting.
It is.
And I think she has, I think her explanation for the lack of damage is better than anyone else's that's been tried. And also, but the fact that it came down at all is just extraordinary.
It is, and as you essentially said right there, the only buildings with the WTC prefix were destroyed either outright or were pulled down immediately following the events of 9/11.
Exactly.
And the only other building which was taken down was the Bankers Trust, or the Deutsche Bank building, there's a whole story to that. That was just across the street from the World Trade Center. That building was actually repaired initially in 2006. I think it was been repaired by, and then they took it down piece by piece, and it cost them $80 million or $70 million to dismantle that building piece by piece. They didn't do a controlled demolition. And the excuse they gave was that the building had got a mold infection after they repaired it.
Let's take a guess as to why it really wasn't taken out in controlled demolition. Because if you try to take any of those down in controlled demolition, you have an unbelievable, god-awful mess down in that part of the city. Like, seriously, all that mass coming straight on down, forget about it. You wouldn't be able to function in Lower Manhattan.
If you go and look up about the Bankers Trust building, the Deutsche Bank, I've got a link about that whole history of that whole building on a forum if anybody wants it. So just write to me and I'll send you it. But basically, the building was demolished by a company that had never demolished any other buildings. It's called John Galt, the company that destroyed it. So what's
John
that
Galt from Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead.
Well, maybe there is some kind of link there. I know that various comments were made when I was looking into this probably 8 or 9 years ago.
Oh, my God.
But, yeah. So there's some very weird stuff with the Bankers Trust building as well. There's a few weird things. Again, we haven't really got time to go into all of that. But that's one of these lesser-known stories. You know, there are other stories, obviously, of things that happened around the site which are lesser known, but that's certainly one of them. And,
can we talk about one other thing while we still have some time here? The bathtub. And a lot of people are not aware of this. So can you explain this for listeners?
I'll try. Basically, the World Trade Center was constructed inside a slurry wall because it was land that was reclaimed from the Hudson River. And that was constructed to hold, the World Trade Center complex so you could go down below sea level, essentially. So I think the lower 7, 8, 9 stories of the World Trade Center were actually below sea level. So to achieve that, they had to build this enormous slurry wall. And if you go and read the reports from the time...
Like a dike, basically.
Like a dike, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that when you go and read the news reports, when the World Trade Center had been destroyed and they had to get the earth-moving equipment in, they were worried that the earth-moving equipment was going to, bash into the slurry wall and cause a breach, and then it would have flooded the whole of Lower Manhattan. That's actually in some of the news reports of the time from like 2001, 2002, whenever that was. And... So why was it that they weren't concerned about 500,000 tons of World Trade Center coming down into the slurry wall and causing a breach and it flooding in Lower Manhattan? That is, again, more evidence from a slightly different perspective that the buildings turned to dust before they hit the ground. And therefore
there was no damage to that.
There's no real damage that
whatsoever.
could be caused to the slurry wall. I think there's a little bit of damage. And there are pictures of this. These are in Where Did the Towers Go? They're on the website. So all of these things are pointing to the simple fact, as Dr. Wood says, that the towers did not burn up. They didn't slam to the ground. They mostly turned to dust in midair. And if that's one thing, I want to show
this image. This is for people who can see this on video. This is probably the best image in her book that I found. So you've got a graphic representation of the height of the towers of the World Trade Center, and a topographical, this is like a 3D image of what remained afterward. And you can actually see graphically that almost 90% of the mass is simply not represented in the debris that was in the aftermath. And this is, again, from Dr. Judy Wood's research.
That's another very good illustration, Richard, of what we're talking about. And the problem, other people have tried to say, oh, yeah, well, concrete turns to dust with explosives and things like this. I mean, we've been over that already, in some sense at least. But it's the steel that's the problem. Those buildings were, you look at the construction of the steel. I did a calculation. This was something that there was this character called Dr. Greg Jenkins. He did an ambush interview with Dr. Wood, and he made this statement that you shouldn't attempt to count the debris. So I, of course, went and tried to count the debris, or the debris that should have been there. And I did a simple calculation, and I worked out that if you added up all of the steel in the World Trade Center and put it into a long length, it'd be 750 miles long, all of the steel. That's the figure I came out with. So where did that 750 miles length of steel? This is not concrete. You can forget all the other. That's just the steel. But as Dr. Wood pointed out, there were no toilets found in the debris. There was one filing cabinet found, and that was from Ben and Jerry's shop. And they actually gave them some of the cash back, which they found, I think, in a safe.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. They found a little bit of cash, and they found out from a receipt or some paperwork that it belonged to Ben and Jerry's, and they gave them it back.
Andrew, we only have about a minute or two in this segment of our talk. So, I guess I would ask you to for listeners, if you would care to wrap up just what you think are the most significant elements that they need to know about 9/11, about the destruction of the towers, and about anything else.
Sure. Well, the main thing is that you've got to start looking at is to do with energy, because this is about energy. Yes, of course, there's all the political stuff, but it's about energy. The other thing that you need to look into is the weather, which hopefully we'll get to talk about in the second hour, because this is vitally important.
Yes, we will. I would like to.
Yeah, but again, it's on Dr. Wood's website. I'm not asking anybody to buy anything. My 9/11 books are free in electronic form. You can get them in paperback from Amazon if you want. But the electronic versions are free. They'll give you a summary of the evidence. But you've really got to be thinking big. There are other aspects to 9/11. It's not just about the war on terror. It's not just about the Patriot Act. Yes, that's important as well. But there's a whole other level to this. And the Dr. Wood research shows you from a scientific point of view what part of that picture is.
Well, and she gets into Tesla and Hutchinson effect, and I think that's probably right. Really where we're going to want to explore that. But honestly, the more that I've gone in and thought about it, the more it makes sense to me that we're talking about there are extreme types of evidence that were on the ground in New York City. And when you are dealing with extreme evidence, you have to move beyond mere conventional types of explanations, seems to me. And I think that's where she's going with it and where you're going. Well, look, so this will conclude the first hour of my interview with Andrew Johnson. I've really enjoyed this, Andrew, and I'm glad that we're doing this. To hear us continue this conversation, you can go to my website, richardolanmembers.com, where Andrew and I are going to go a bit further, and we're going to talk about I think some of these evidences of directed energy and Tesla tech and Hutchinson effect and so forth. So for right now, thanks for listening. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be kind to each other. Be right back.